He was not an ordinary person. Sammy had always been drawn to places others avoided, places rumored to be haunted, cursed, or simply not meant to be approached. Since childhood, he had heard stories about the pyramids in Egypt, not just about their greatness, but about hidden passages, unknown chambers, and sounds no one could explain. There was something inside him, a strange curiosity, or perhaps something closer to a hidden call. And one day, he decided to answer it. Sammy arrived in Egypt on a hot evening, but strangely, the temperature began to drop unnaturally as he got closer to the pyramids. He rented a car and headed straight into the desert, without waiting for the next morning. The sky leaned toward a deep orange, and the sun slowly sank below the horizon, as if it were hiding. When the pyramids appeared before him, he stopped. They were not like the pictures. They were bigger, more massive, and more silent. A heavy silence, as if the place did not allow any sound to remain. He felt something strange in his chest, as if he was being watched. He stepped out of the car and closed the door slowly. The sound of it echoed unnaturally across the desert. Then silence returned. He took out his flashlight and a small bag and walked toward one of the entrances where no one was around. Strangely, he saw no guards, not even tourists, as if the place was empty just for him. At the entrance of the pyramid, he paused. He looked inside. Complete darkness. Cold air flowed out from within, despite the desert heat. He extended his hand slightly into the entrance and felt an intense, unnatural cold. He swallowed and said to himself, "I'll just take a quick look and come back." But deep inside, he knew he wouldn't return easily. He entered. His first step inside the pyramid felt like crossing into another world. The sound changed. Even his own breathing became disturbingly loud. The passage was narrow, and the walls were too close, as if they were pressing in on him. With every step forward, he felt the light behind him fading, until he reached a point where he could no longer see the entrance. Only darkness, in front of him and behind him. He began to hear a faint sound, like something scraping against stone. He stopped. He turned off the flashlight for a moment. Silence. Then he turned it back on. Nothing. He smiled nervously and said, "Clearly I'm just tense." He continued walking. But this time, the feeling was different. It was no longer just curiosity, but a clear sense that someone was walking with him. Not in front of him, nor behind him, but very close. Suddenly, he saw something. On the left wall, a shadow. But the problem was, the shadow did not match him. It was moving on its own. Sammy froze. He slowly raised the flashlight. The shadow disappeared. He stepped closer to the wall. Nothing. He laughed quietly, trying to calm himself. It must be a reflection. It must be. But his voice trembled. Then he heard it clearly. A whisper. Very faint, as if it were coming from inside the wall. He moved closer, trying to make out the words, but the sound was distorted, unclear, as if it were an ancient language or broken speech. He quickly stepped back. His heart began to pound. This time he spoke louder. "Is anyone here?"
His voice echoed through the passage, but no reply came. He decided to go back. He turned around, but the passage was not the same. He swore he hadn't come this way. The walls were different. The carvings were different. And the corridor, longer. The cold intensified, even as his body began to sweat. He started walking faster, then quicker, almost running. Suddenly, something passed beside him. Fast, too fast, like a streak of black smoke. He stopped abruptly. He raised the flashlight. Nothing. But this time,
Yahya Ibrahim, Kitab al-Janabi. There was no doubt. He was not alone. And in that moment, he heard a voice right behind him. Clear, very close, as if someone was standing right by his ear. The voice whispered, "Don't leave." He froze. He couldn't move. Even his breathing stopped. And very slowly, he began to turn. The flashlight shaking in his hand, his heart pounding out of his chest. And when he fully turned around, he saw no one. But the flashlight began to fade. The light started flickering. And in the final flicker, he saw something far at the end of the corridor. A human-shaped figure, standing, not moving. Then, the light went out, and Sami was swallowed by complete darkness. Sami came out of the pyramid, gasping for air. His breaths were broken, his face pale as if he had seen death itself. The sun had completely disappeared, and the sky had turned dark. But for him, the real darkness was still chasing him. He quickly got into his car and locked the doors tightly, as if something might follow him. He stayed there for minutes, not moving, just staring at the front mirror, then the side mirrors, then the rearview mirror, as if he was waiting to see that thing from the corridor. But he saw nothing. He returned to the hotel in silence. The place felt normal. People laughing, talking, living their lives as if everything was fine. And that made it even stranger to him. How could the world be normal after what he saw? He entered his room but couldn't sit still. He started pacing back and forth. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the shadow. He heard the whisper and felt that voice behind his ear. Don't leave. At that moment, he decided not to stay alone. He called his 3 friends, Ali, Marwan, and Hassan, who were also in Egypt on a different trip, and they agreed to meet. An hour later, they were sitting in a cafe inside the hotel. Dim lights, soft music, and the sounds of people around them. But Sami wasn't really with them. He was lost in thought. Ali laughed and said, "Sami, you look like you just walked out of a horror movie. What's wrong?" Sami slowly raised his head and said in a low voice, "I went inside the pyramid today." Marwan replied, "That's normal. Everyone goes in." Sami shook his head. "No, I went deep inside, not the tourist areas." Their expressions changed slightly. Hassan asked, "And then?" Sami began to tell everything. The entrance, The cold, the moving shadow, the whisper, the voice behind him, even the moment when the flashlight went out. Sometimes he spoke quickly, sometimes very slowly, as if he was reliving it all over again. But when he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, Marwan burst out laughing. He said, "Man, you were just scared of the dark and started hallucinating." Ali added, "Or maybe someone was messing with you." Hassan was calmer, but said, "Strange, but I don't think it goes as far as voices and whispers." Sammy looked at them, anger clear in his eyes. "I'm not joking." They fell silent. Then he said, "What I saw wasn't normal. There was something there." They exchanged glances. Marwan smirked. "All right, let's go tomorrow and see this thing together." Ali laughed. "Yeah, let's go ghost hunting." Hassan said, "I'm in, but we go in and out quickly." Sammy didn't smile. He just said, "Okay, but don't blame me if something happens." That night, Sammy didn't sleep. Every time he tried to drift off, he felt like someone was standing at his door. Once, he heard a faint sound. Knock. He opened his eyes, looked at the door. Silence. Then, knock, knock. Someone was knocking. Slowly. Sammy stood up cautiously, approached the door, and looked through the peephole. No one. He hesitated, then suddenly opened the door. The hallway was empty, but the air was cold. Cold in a way that felt exactly like the air inside the pyramid. He quickly shut the door and stepped back. But before he could turn, he heard the same sound. Behind him this time. A whisper. Very close. "You came back." He froze. He didn't turn. Didn't move. He just stood there, as if time had stopped. And in a moment, the sound vanished. In the morning, the four of them gathered. Sammy was silent. The others were excited, but not out of fear, out of challenge. They reached the pyramids. Same place. Same silence. But this time, Sammy wasn't alone. Ali looked around and said, "Strange, the place is way too empty." Hassan added, "Where are the guards?" No one answered. Sammy looked at the entrance. Said, "This is it." They looked inside. Darkness, cold air, and a silence, heavier than yesterday. Marwan smiled and said, "Come on, hero. Show us the ghosts." They went in. Step by step, their footsteps echoing through the passage. At first, everything was normal. Too normal. Then, Ali suddenly stopped. In a low voice, he said, "Did you guys see something move over there?" They all turned, but they saw nothing. Marwan said, "Where? There's nothing." But Ali wasn't laughing. "I'm sure there was something." At that moment, they heard a sound. Behind them, a step, then another. They froze. turned around. No one. Then, a third step. But this time, it wasn't from any of them. Sammy slowly looked at them and said, "Now, do you believe me?" The four of them froze in place. The sound they heard wasn't imagination. It wasn't Sammy's mind playing tricks this time. It was real. A step, then silence, then another step, as if someone was walking behind them, matching their pace, stopping whenever they stopped. Hassan said with a trembling voice, "There has to be someone. Maybe a guard?" Sammy replied quickly, "I told you, there's no one here." Ali raised his flashlight and pointed it toward the passage behind them. The beam stretched into the darkness, but revealed nothing. Only ancient walls and strange carvings, as if they were watching them. Marwan tried to sound brave. "Maybe it's just the echo of our footsteps, bouncing back." But his voice didn't even convince himself. They continued walking, but this time, slowly. Each of them turned around every few seconds, and the silence grew heavier. After a few minutes, the passage began to narrow even more, until they had to walk in a single line. The air grew colder, and a strange smell began to spread. An old smell, like a mix of dust and something rotten. Hassan covered his nose. "What is that smell?" Sammy replied, "It wasn't here before." Suddenly, the passage opened into a wide chamber. They stopped at the entrance. Slowly, they raised their flashlights, and the light revealed something that froze the blood in their veins. Mummies. Dozens of mummies, lined up on both sides, standing like guards. Their faces were covered, but their features showed beneath the ancient wrappings. Ali whispered, "We should go back, now." But Marwan said, "No. Let's just take a quick look and leave." They stepped into the chamber carefully. Their footsteps echoed in a terrifying way. Each step felt like it was waking something up. Sammy shined his light on one mummy, then another, then a third. Suddenly, Hassan gasped sharply. Pointing with a shaking hand, he said, "The eyes! Look at the eyes!" They moved closer, slowly, and focused the light on one mummy's face. At first, they saw nothing. Then, something impossible happened. The mummy's eye moved, very slowly, as if it was looking at them. They all stepped back at once. Ali said, No, this isn't real." But before he could finish, another eye moved, in a second mummy, then a third. It felt like all the eyes were watching them. At that moment, all the flashlights went out, at the exact same time. Complete darkness. Hassan started screaming, "Turn them on! Turn them on!" But no one could. Then, the sound began. At first, very faint, like someone crying. Then it grew clearer. Children crying. Sad, painful crying, as if it was coming from everywhere. From the walls, the ground, behind them, even above them. Marwan said, his voice breaking, "Are there children here?" But the sound wasn't normal. There was something wrong about it, as if the crying wasn't entirely human. It got closer. Very close. So close that Sammy felt like someone was standing right in front of him, in the darkness. Then, something passed beside him. Cold air, like a body moving. He reached out into the darkness and touched something. A hand. He pulled back instantly, shouting, "There's someone here!" But the hand was gone. At that exact moment, one flashlight flickered back on. A weak, shaking beam of light. Ali pointed it forward, and what he saw froze him in place. A small shadow, the shape of a child, standing at the end of the chamber, head lowered, not moving. Hassan whispered, "No, that's not human." The child slowly raised its head, but it had no face, only darkness. And the light went out again. They all screamed and began moving blindly. But in the darkness, there was no direction. The sounds grew louder. The crying turned into screaming, and the footsteps returned. But this time, not one, dozens, all around them. And in the middle of that chaos, Sammy shouted at the top of his lungs, "Don't move! Nobody move!" But was that enough?